Oh hey, so I'm currently putting up these to see if anyone can remember any of these cartoons which have become lost over the years. No, I don't have a lot going on in my life at the moment, sure. So there are loads of shows I watched when I was young, but I've totally forgotten about. But it's all still in my brain somewhere, and through this video, and probably a few more because believe me, there's a lot of shows, I hope to tease those memories out of my skull. Hopefully you've clicked on this video because you saw something in the thumbnail that unlocked a memory lurking in the deepest, darkest vestibules of your mind. And if this video did manage to shake loose some of those memories, then please make sure to like, comment and subscribe. So let's begin with a show that I used to watch on Toon Disney. Yep, I'm starting off with a channel that people don't even seem to remember anymore. Back in the early 2000s there were lots of shows on Toon Disney that seemed to only exist in my own memories. Things like Lloyd In Space or Brandy And Mr Whiskers, or what about Roly Poly Ollie? What the hell was that? But none of those are the show that I'm picking for this list. The one that I'm picking for this list is Dave the Barbarian. Dave the Barbarian ran for one series between 2004 and 2005. The show is set in medieval times and revolves around Dave and his family having to now rule the kingdom of Udragoth after their parents leave them to fight some war or something. So this show was very surreal with a lot of fourth wall breaks. If you've ever seen the show Chowder, well it's that. It's Chowder a few years before Chowder. And I've got to say, rewatching this one, it wasn't as good as I remembered. I remember thinking that the fourth wall breaks in this show were some of the funniest things I'd ever seen. It was one of my first experiences with meta comedy and I just loved it. But yeah, rewatching it, there were some funny lines here and there, but it just feels very standard and run-of-the-mill. Which I don't actually think that's a problem with the show itself. I think it's more that a lot of shows that came after it were so similar in their style of humour that revisiting this show, it just doesn't feel new or innovative now that other shows have taken this formula and arguably been more successful at it. Or at least that's how I felt watching the first few episodes. Because when I hit episode 3, I started to remember why I liked this show so much. And it was solely down to this guy. The Dark Lord Chuckles the Silly Piggy. I mean, just with that name, you know you're in for a good time. Everything that comes out of this character's mouth is just pure gold. And that's something that a lot of Disney shows from around this time did really well. Characters like Dr. Doofenshmirtz or Yzma and Kronk or Dr. Drakken. Disney really seemed to perfect the ineffective villain trope. It's still hilarious watching Chuckles' evil plans become more and more inane. Like going from having an evil army of pretzel men to then having an evil sofa. Or my favourite episode of the show where Chuckles kidnaps the narrator and then forces him to change the show so that he's now the protagonist. It even gets its own new theme song performed by Chuckles. It's just really funny. So if you do remember this show and want to check it back out or want to watch it for the first time, I can't recommend the show as a whole, but I can certainly recommend the episodes where Chuckles the Silly Piggy is the villain. Okay, so next up we have Sheep in the Big City, which was one of the original cartoons on Cartoon Network. It ran for 2 seasons between the year 2000 and the year 2002. So it aired around the same time as shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy, Powerpuff Girls and Courage the Cowardly Dog. The only difference being that everyone remembers those shows. And even shows from around this point, like Whatever Happened to Robot Jones, still gets videos about how no one remembers them. But Sheep in the Big City has basically nothing. Even YouTubers who talk about forgotten cartoons still forget this show. And I've never heard Sheep in the Big City mentioned by anyone but me right now. But I know for a fact that it existed because I watched it. I watched it when it first came out, and I watched it again to make this video. And you're looking at clips of it right now, so it does exist. So the show is about a secret government organisation who made a sheep-powered ray gun which can only fit one specific sheep, our main silent protagonist. So he ends up running away from the farm and going to a big city, and most episodes revolve around him being pursued by the military. I feel like the reason this show wasn't successful and isn't really remembered today is that it was too smart for its own good. A lot of the humour relies on subtle wordplay, like for example the sheep all failing their leadership test. Get it? Because they're sheep. Or
Sheepy's got enough money to eat. 'cause he's a telemarketer.
Hello?
Oh, and of course there's the frankly excessive use of oxymorons. For those of you who don't know, an oxymoron is where two opposite words are placed together. Like how all the villains are called things like private public, major minor, or the main antagonist of the show, general specific. And the show has just so much subtle humour that went way over my head as a kid, and a lot of it still went over my head as an adult. And I feel like that's probably why it clearly didn't leave much of an impression and stick in people's memories as much. And if the show wasn't doing wordplay comedy, it was doing fourth wall jokes. Before Chowder, before Dave the Barbarian, and this show is way more meta than both of those shows combined. And this was my first experience to this kind of comedy. Characters are pretty constantly referring to the script or arguing with the narrator, or one of my favourite moments from the very first episode where Sheep jumps off of a building and is replaced by a very obvious stunt double. And if that wasn't enough, in between the actual show segments, we get fake commercials or clips of other fake shows, with very random or parody setups, which on rewatch massively reminded me of the interdimensional cable episodes of Rick and Morty. I do, however, feel that the show's premise and style probably wasn't particularly sustainable, as the novelty of these jokes does wear pretty thin when it becomes a running gag in every single episode. Like, if you've seen one episode, you've pretty much seen them all. But that could just be because I binged watched it. I'm sure if I watched it one episode a week like people did at the time, then I probably wouldn't feel that way. When Sheep in the Big City first came out, it was the highest rated premiere for a Cartoon Network original series. But it seems like people did start to get bored of it pretty quickly, and the show's viewership declined pretty rapidly, leading to the show being cancelled after only 26 episodes. However, the animation studio Curious Pictures, which made this show, would then go on to produce Codename Kids Next Door the same year, and that show was way more successful and way more popular. So maybe Sheep in the Big City died so that Codename Kids Next Door could live, and I don't know, I guess I'm okay with that. So next up we have Yvon Of The Yukon, which I remember used to be shown on the UK channel CBBC pretty much constantly during the early 2000s. So the show stars a guy called Yvon, who is some kind of insult to French culture, who was frozen in ice for 300 years and now lives with some Inuits. So it's your classic man out of time story, but none of this explains why he runs around in his underwear. They had trousers back then. They show him wearing trousers before he gets frozen in the ice. So why does he walk around solely in his underwear? Especially now that he's living in places with a pretty cold climate. No one else wears just underwear. I don't know, I assume there's some important plot-driven reason for it, and not just some cheap, smutty joke. So let's start with episode 1, and believe me, that's all I could get through. I never said these shows were going to be good. So episode 1 is about this kid wanting body hair and to be a man. And then to get us to sympathise with his plight, we're shown some naked, hairy kids. Look, I'm sure this show isn't just going to be all arses all the time. There's definitely going to be some substance in there somewhere. So then Yvonne takes this kid camping in order to show him how to be a man. And what kind of wacky antics do they get up to while on this trip? Well, they go fishing and Yvonne's underwear gets ripped off. He then urinates in a bush, nearly gets his genitals cut off, a bear sniffs his arse. He dangles off a ledge by his underwear. There's also a bit with these side characters where one gets their tongue stuck to a train track, and then the show heavily implies that the other character is going to pee on their tongue to set them free.
Heck, only warm liquid I can think of is...
The whole show is just this. Just constant knob and arse gags. How did this show manage to run for 3 seasons, 52 episodes? This show ran from 2000 to 2004, making it the longest running show on this list. How could they possibly get 3 seasons out of this show? What happens in those other episodes? And I'm not willing to watch them because I'm not strong enough. But they do have a plot synopsis on Wikipedia. So, there's an episode where they become swingers. There's an episode where they hunt renegade beavers. Or my favourite episode description, which simply says, a bizarre creature emerges from Yvonne's armpit. I can only assume that episode won an Emmy, or at least was nominated. Next up we have The Life and Times of Tim, which is a show that I don't really need to dig deep to remember because I still watch it pretty regularly. And that's because I think The Life and Times of Tim is one of the funniest shows ever created, and it definitely doesn't get enough recognition. The show has a semi-improvisational tone with lots of stuttering and realistic sounding dialogue, and it revolves around this character Tim. Each episode will usually revolve around Tim getting caught up in a situation against his will, and that situation will quickly escalate out of control. The thing which this show managed to pull off so well, which I don't think any other show can do, is have a main character with a huge lack of agency. Like, the character rarely starts off an episode wanting something, or if he does, it's so small to the point of insignificance, and he seems to lack any control with what's going on around him, just being persuaded or pushed around by other characters, and dragged forcibly into the plot, which on paper really shouldn't work, but it does. So take that, Dan Harmon, in your story circle. And other than the absurdity of the escalating misfortune befalling Tim, the show's comedy will often also rely on cringe. An episode will usually have a character pressuring Tim into doing something he doesn't want to do, that will then get him in trouble, he then tries to fix it, but will inevitably make the situation worse, and the scenes will linger on characters reacting to Tim's actions, or blaming Tim for other people's actions, and then Tim will stumble and stutter, and it's just beautifully awkward. It's the same feeling as watching someone get told off and then them lie to try and get out of it, but then stumbling over their own lies and just getting in worse and worse trouble. And oh, it's just so funny. Now, the biggest criticism with this show is one that you've probably already noticed just by looking at the clips of it, and that's that it looks very, very, very low budget. But I've always argued that's because the show doesn't rely on visuals at all. It doesn't need to. The show could easily work as a radio show. The characters are voiced perfectly and nothing in the show is told through visuals. So it could really still be enjoyed with your eyes closed. But so many people were still put off by the look of the show, claiming that it's something that they could have made themselves. And in order to prove to you that it's not just something that anyone could make, I tried to make an episode of The Life and Times of Tim. For the purpose of this video, I wrote, recorded, and animated my own short episode of The Life and Times of Tim. And here it is.
Tim, you're here, good. I need you to do me a favor.
Yeah, sure, whatever you need.
I need you to take your clothes off real quick and act like a chicken for me.
Excuse me?
You know, just take your clothes off and do what a chicken would do. You know, make some noises, peck around for some seed. I don't know, use your imagination, Tim.
I wouldn't even do that on a non-work day.
This is just how the corporate world works now, Tim. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Come on, Tim!
Alright, they're coming off.
My God, you are a sight to behold. Cluck, cluck, cluck. What are you doing, Tim?
Just making chicken noises.
That is quite possibly the worst chicken noise I've ever heard. Give it some more heart, some more pizzazz. I mean, just off the top of my head, something like cock-a-rock-a-roo!
I don't know. I feel like that one was worse.
Okay, Tim, you've twisted my arm. I tell you what, I'm gonna bring in an independent third party here. Jill, could you get in here real quick?
No, we don't need to involve Jill in any of this.
We're gonna get Jill in here and she can judge which of us has the better chicken noise.
This is not how I saw today going.
You know, Jill was raised on a farm. She's lived a life, Tim. And what are you? You're just a naked man in an office. Well, that could have gone better.
I gotta agree with you there. So yeah, whilst the show can be animated by anyone, the show needs the brilliant writing and improv skills of the cast, or otherwise it would end up like what I just made. And even then, that still took me a whole day to make. And also, after attempting to animate an episode, I changed my mind about the visuals of the show being unimportant. The subtle little awkward looks to the side or anxious scratching is something I appreciate a lot more now I've had to actually animate it. It's still very simplistic and unfluid movement, but I feel that it adds so much to the characters. So if I haven't made it clear already, I love this show. But it got cancelled after 3 seasons in 2012, and Tim was never to be seen again. Except, that was only until last year,
when the creator of the show made a new TV show called 10-Year-Old Tom. And it's basically the same show, just they've changed an I for an O. Steve Dildarian, who used to write for The Life and Times of Tim and voice the character, is now writing 10-Year-Old Tom and voicing the character of Tom. And it has the exact same brand of humour, and it's like having my favourite show back. So if you're in the market for a new adult-oriented animated comedy, then I highly recommend checking out 10-Year-Old Tom. And that's it, that's all the shows I'm going to talk about today. So if there's any other shows that you might have forgot or you think I might have forgot, then be sure to leave them as a comment so I can talk about it in a future video. So there we go, hopefully someone out there remembers these old cartoons and gets in touch. You know, I gotta say, I'm starting to regret doing this. I regret bringing this really heavy tape dispenser here, I regret using up the last of the printer ink. I really regret photoshopping over the picture of an actual missing child to make this poster. Incidentally, if you have seen little Tommy, his parents are really worried about him. There was a number for you to call, but I covered that up with some self-promotion. What am I doing? I used to be a teacher. I used to have a career. I had a pension.